let's have a conversation about the rapid evolution of automotive technology and the future of electronic mobility. To do so, I want to bring in my friend Rei Vardi. He's the CEO and founder of Eon. Backed by compelling industry data, this conversation highlights how keyless ignition systems have surged from an adoption rate of 70% in 2014 to over 90% just 5 years later, and now has become standard in new vehicles. And now, as we look ahead, keyless systems are expected to be integrated in approximately 82% of global vehicle sales by the end of 2025, with North America leading the adoption, according to my friends over at Yahoo Finance. Let's also unpack shifting customer priorities. A striking 96% of today's modern American drivers say that fuel economy is at least somewhat important when selecting a new car, while 66% consider it very or highly important to their purchasing power. At the same token, the environmental sentiment is also gaining significant momentum, with nearly 35% of Americans supporting stricter government limits when it comes to tailpipe emissions to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles, according to the University of Chicago. Against this backdrop, Rei shares how he built Eon from a dorm room side project into a national EV brand and mobility platform which spans over 30 cities and over 3,000 vehicles without raising outside capital. Eon's model connects underused electric vehicles with individuals and businesses seeking flexible access for owners to earn passive income through a virtual fleet system. To date, the platform has helped vehicle owners generate more than $10 million in revenue, while also eliminating and reducing 16 million pounds of CO2 emissions. With a background in biomedical engineering, Rei also discusses scaling a bootstrapped company, improving automation, and his vision for making EV access more simpler, accessible, and more efficient. I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm excited to learn about Eon and all of the great work that you're doing with the keyless vehicle and electronic vehicle space. It's great to see you on this Thursday, and thanks so much for being here, buddy.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. So before we dive into the nitty gritty of our conversation, Rei, I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you telling me about why you believe that the electronic vehicle, keyless vehicle space is the wave of the future, my friend. Why do you think so many people are excited about the future of vehicles being electronic, my friend. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, it mostly comes down to, how do we make car rentals and sharing as convenient as safe as possible for people? Because at the end of the day, people, especially if you live in a big city, you don't want to be dealing with, handling a vehicle or managing or dealing with the cost of parking it, insuring it, and just having it sit around and, you know, collect dust and waste your money all day. Most people just want to have a vehicle, for when they need to get out of the city or they have a specific task they need to do. So our goal is to just make that access as easy and fast as possible. And what that does is that actually is what accelerates, the adoption of the cars, adoption of using electric cars, and for people to choose to, book as needed cars instead of just buying something that most of the time is just losing their money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you started Eon Bunny through your dorm room as a side project, but you've now grown it into a platform with over 3,000 vehicles, and it's in 30 cities, buddy. So tell me all about the growth of the company, why you started it, and why you love what you do, my friend.
Yeah, of course. So basically, this whole thing started when I was in college. My dad had one of the first Teslas, and uh, when he was moving out of state for work, he was planning on selling the car. But I really wanted to keep it. So what I ended up doing is that I started to try and monetize it because I was a college kid who could not afford, the lease on this car. And very quickly, I realized that renting out this car to try and make some money on it was just really really tough. There's no such thing as sharing a car. There's really only becoming the world's tiniest car rental company. So right off the bat, day one, I was dealing with people scratching the car, denting it, smoking in the car, not bringing it back on time. At one point, someone robbed a bank with my first car. And just everything that could have go wrong did. And so at a certain point, it kind of dawned on me that, if this is ever going to work, this whole process has to be fixed because I couldn't keep skipping my classes to hand off keys to people. And I couldn't deal with the amount of damage and risk that was going on. So what ended up happening is that I realized that the thing about electric cars specifically, and newer tech in cars today as it keeps developing is that these are basically computers on wheels. And the best thing that we could do is actually utilize that function, integrate directly into the cars, and then manage all the functionality from above. And so all I wanted to do was create a network where I could rent out my car passively and not have to worry about it. And by doing so, I realized that we're actually onto something pretty big here. If we can make cars very easily shareable for people, we can turn an asset that, is burning a hole in your pocket into something that can actually earn you a profit, all without lifting a finger. And that's really where the idea of Eon came about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, buddy, that your team focuses on mobility and efficiency all at once. And I'm wondering if we can dive in and have a conversation about the future of mobility, how it's going to affect the automotive industry, and ultimately affect things like fuel economy and people's buying power when they can see that they can have a cleaner and safer way of getting around, my friend. So what are your thoughts on the future of mobility and how it'll affect things like fuel economy moving forward?
Yeah. So I think the biggest kind of trend that you're seeing in mobility is that it's shared, right? And you're already sort of seeing this with a lot of, the biggest changes in the mobility space in the past 10 years have been Uber and Lyft and, all of these shared rideshare companies. And what you're really seeing is that people need to get from point A to point B. That's what matters the most. Before this kind of shared space really took off, if you wanted to get somewhere, you'd have to have a car. You'd have to have it. either you own it or, you would have a friend drive you somewhere. But what having shared mobility, one asset that can service many, many people actually does is that it means that A, you don't need nearly as many vehicles on the road. B, those vehicles get used a lot more. And C, the carbon impact, the fuel impact is much less because you just don't need as many resources. You can utilize what you already have far more efficiently. So what we're doing in the rental space, what we realized is that if you can create a very frictionless car sharing experience, aka Kevin, you have a car, I want to use your car to get around town, but I don't even need to talk to you. I just walk up to the car, it unlocks because I have the app on my phone, get in and go, and we manage that entire process safely. What that means is that your car can actually service the entire neighborhood. You don't need every single person to have a vehicle if you just have a few shared cars that get people around. So in terms of what we're seeing in the future, the reality is that, cars and vehicles are going to get much more, complex, technologically advanced. They're going to have more features and capabilities. But the key is that you're going to see less and less direct ownership and much more pay per use of when you actually need to get around as opposed to like, I own this asset and it's depreciating in value every month.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rhea, I'm also curious to ask you about, mobility's relationship to entrepreneurship. As you said, it provides car owners with the ability to make passive income, but it also opens up a new competitive advantage for entrepreneurs specifically. So I'm wondering if we can talk about the relationship between mobility and entrepreneurship. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Of course. Look, one of the things that people have two big assets in their life. Most people, they have, their home and their car. And, people kind of realize that you can monetize your home pretty easily by having, renting it out, being a landlord type of thing. But with cars, it's just been a lot more difficult to do. And the reality is because vehicles just carry so much more inherent risk in sharing. When you give someone a car, it's sort of like giving them a gun and just saying like, hey, please don't hurt anybody while you're using this thing. Please bring it back on time. Please don't get into an accident. Please don't take it to, to Mexico and disappear off the face of the earth, right? There's just a lot more things that you can do. There's far more ways you can misuse that asset as opposed to misusing someone's house, right? Like I can't rob a bank with someone's house. Much more difficult. So when it comes to entrepreneurship and how you can actually utilize these assets that you already have around you, a car is actually a much lower barrier to entry if you can monetize it. If you can monetize the vehicle, you can get an auto loan pretty quickly and, be able to get yourself this asset at a much lower barrier to entry financing for it in such a clear way. And so that's kind of what the power of being able to monetize your vehicle is and why that's such a good kind of starting point for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about entrepreneurial freedom, I'm also curious, Red, to ask you about entrepreneurial sort of freedom and creating different revenue streams to build and ultimately collaborate on other businesses. Because if you have, this electric vehicle bringing you in money, you can also collaborate with more entrepreneurial ideas. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the freedom this model also provides entrepreneurs to become more creative. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, as any entrepreneur, even someone who's thinking about getting into the entrepreneurial space knows, right? Like your ability to make moves in this space is dependent on how much cash you have to burn to play with it, right? So it's just like a snowball with everything else. If you're building in multiple income streams and you've got a little bit more capital to experiment with, you're going to be much more able to take risks. Somebody who has very little margin, they're trying to, keep up with the bills, feed their family. They don't really have anything left over at the end of the month. That's a much harder starting point to start off a new venture or to experiment or to try your hand at something new, right? If you, as an entrepreneur, one of the things that that defines us is that we take risks. Well, the more we can take risks from a position of confidence as opposed to desperation, the better our decision making is. And so if you're just strictly looking at it from a place of how can I get myself to a more stable position so that I can make more bets in whatever, medium I think is best, getting yourself some kind of reliable income stream that's backed by an asset, especially, is one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Ray, I'm also curious to ask you about starting a startup like this and the variables that you had to consider when starting this, because it's a unique business model. There's uncertainty in entrepreneurship inherently, but I'm also curious to ask you about looking back and as you continue to grow this company, what do you think people need to know about the journey of this company and how it got over the pitfalls and turned them into triumphs to get to where you are today, my friend? I'm curious to ask you about, your journey and starting a unique startup like this. What are your thoughts, buddy?
I feel like we could, fill an entire hour with this, like,
Yeah.
the, the reality is that, no two startups are alike. No two companies that you're going to start, have the same journey. And look, for me, this has been a journey of 8 years at this point. I've been doing this my entire adult life. This started off as a dorm room project that I never envisioned would become, a nationwide company, with multiple employees across multiple states. This was always, at the beginning, just a side project that I just wanted to make a little bit extra income on the side and have an excuse to own this really cool car without having to pay for it. That was really it. That was like literally from start to finish. That was my full goal. During the course of, the the journey of like realizing the potential of unlocking, the vehicle capability for other people as well, and then taking that to scale, I almost lost the business like 5 times. Everything that could have happened happened. And it was an experience in learning to just kind of grit your teeth, be patient, figure out a solution, and move forward. We tried raising capital early on in the business, never ended up for a year. I was going from investor to investor and wasn't able to get a single person to say yes. When we finally did get someone to say yes, I had, my co-founder and my team basically fall apart, and therefore the deal for investment fell apart. And I had to pick myself up from nothing with no one nearby, nobody to work on the business with me and say, okay, you know what? We can't do it the classic way. No one's giving me the trust or the money to build it the way I pitched that I would do it. Let's just do it however it needs to be done. Whatever it takes, step 1, step 2, step 3, as long as it takes, let's just go into it. And you're dealing with that uncertainty all the time. You are just facing the prospect that all of the work that you've put in the past 5 years goes to zero. And that's the reality that I think a lot of founders can sympathize with. It's something that we kind of all go through. But the beautiful thing is that, once you kind of commit and you put yourself out there and you push as hard as you can against any odd, the reward is like it's the best thing you could do for your life. You get to work with hopefully people that you really enjoy working with on projects that are interesting to you. And, you get to set the agenda. You get to decide what's important, what you want to work on. So one of the things that I would say is, if you're thinking about starting a company, if this is something that's interesting to you, you just got to bake it into the cake. And at the end of the day, you'll realize it's the best thing about being an entrepreneur. It's the worst thing, but it's also the best thing, because it just makes you so much more resilient for anything else that comes on. afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ray, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on this because, there was a study earlier this year that said two-thirds and 66% of vehicle manufacturers expect the increase of electric vehicles despite, slowing sales to begin the year. And they also are predicting a rise in the sale of battery operated cars as well as electric vehicles. So I'm curious. This study came from S&P Global, my friend. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the future of the industry and whether you think that electronic vehicles as a main source of purchase will increase moving forward. What are your thoughts, my friend?
Well, look, if I have to be completely honest with you, I don't think electric vehicles are going to fully replace gas cars, almost, for a very, very long time. And the reason is because they're absolutely incredible in their own domain, but they're not perfect for every use case. So, for example, one of the things that is awesome, I'll give you two scenarios. You live in a city that has great EV infrastructure, right? You've got a charger near your house or in your garage. You've got, many of the garages or parking facilities in the city have chargers available. And the car's got a pretty decent range. So what ends up happening with an electric vehicle there is that you actually end up saving time compared to gas because you don't have to fill up gas ever. You can just plug in overnight whenever the car's parked, and you're basically fully charged all the time. Additionally, you've got this car that is not just having to go to the gas station every once in a while. You're saving money. Electricity, depending on where you are in the country, can be between 70% the cost of gas to a third the cost of gas, depending on when you charge, where you charge, and gas prices in your area. So it ends up being more economical, especially in the long term. And speaking of the long term, EVs just last much longer when it comes to maintenance and other issues that come up. There's basically four moving parts on an electric vehicle, and that's the wheels, which means that maintenance is really, for the most part, relegated to changing out the tires every once in a while. So for those use cases, EVs are a clear winner. They're just way better. They accelerate faster. They're more fun. They're more technologically advanced. There's many, many, many advantages to EVs. But then let's just say you're talking about, a part of the country where it's much more rural. There's far more distance between points, and people tend to drive a lot more every single day, right? Whereas maybe in the suburbs and the city, you're talking about 50 miles a day that you might be doing. Out in the country, you're talking about maybe 150, 200 miles, somewhere more rural. The reality is that, to get the infrastructure up to the same standard as, what most cities are like today is just kind of a tall order. Mm-hmm. And for those longer trips, you just can't beat the reliability of having a gas station you can stop at every time. If you have to drive long distances, stopping to charge up is kind of a headache, and you have to plan your route specifically, and you might find yourself in dead zones where there's not going to be a charger for, dozens and dozens of miles. And that just eats into your time and your planning, et cetera. So different cars for different use cases. But in the primary population centers where most people live, it's kind of a no-brainer. And that's why you're seeing, that 66% figure. It's because we just know that this is where the future is going, just because that's what the economics are saying.
Mm-hmm. Ray, I know you have a background in biomedical engineering, and you've always been sort of fascinated with building real world systems. I know your company involves, started with that interest, and most of your current work is focused on improving things like automation and, expanding the network and, simplifying the experience when it comes to both renters and owners, my friend. So let's talk about improving, automation, your current work, and how it all ties together, my friend.
Yeah. So basically, when we're talking about automation, like if you've ever rented a car, you know, you might have noticed just how many steps are involved in the process, right? When you get to the rental desk, first of all, you stand behind the line. Second of all, you go through, all the options that are available. Then, you have to read through all this documentation and paperwork, sign on the dotted line, put down a card, another card for a deposit, get the keys, do a walk around the car, take pictures, um, get into the car, drive off, and then of course when you bring the car back, there's a whole plethora of processes that happen as well. Post trip checks on the vehicle, gas fuel assessments, tolls that have to be, uh, you know, meticulously counted together and sent back to you. It's just a huge pain and pain for everybody involved. Now, if you try to make that process happen between not like a professional company that has serious systems that tackle all of these steps, but between two individuals. Kevin, you're trying to rent your car out to Bob, your neighbor across the street. You have to go through all that together. We're dealing with two amateurs that are trying to handle this expensive asset between them. It's a tall order. So what we do with all that automation and all those systems automatically is that we actually take you guys out of the picture altogether. We make the car the single source of truth. We talk to the car. So we're doing all of that process at the car level. And that's what sets us apart. That's what makes it so that, you can rent to Bob without even having to talking to Bob. Bob can just show up to your car, get in and go, and you're, still asleep on a Sunday. And by the time Bob brings it back, you saw that your account has, some additional dollars from renting it out. That's the vision. We create that automation. We make that frictionless for you and for Bob. And what ends up happening is that you guys end up using that car a lot more. It has a much bigger impact, far outside, the scope of what it costs to own a vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have a two-part question for you because I find this to be interesting. So,
Mhm.
PricewaterhouseCoopers says that the EV industry is gaining momentum. Now, they say that they believe that that EV cars will make up 19% of
Mhm.
the U.S. automotive industry by the end of 2030. But when you talk to people who are AAA drivers or who use AAA, they
Mhm.
say that by the midpoint of 2025, only about 23% of U.S. drivers believe that most cars will be electronic within the next decade, my friend, which they say is a decline of almost from 40% in 2022. So I'm wondering your thoughts on where that divide is, buddy, and whether you believe the folks at PricewaterhouseCoopers or at AAA, buddy. What should the consumer, in your mind, view about the future, about electronic vehicle sales? What are your thoughts, my friend?
Well, so actually, none of those statistics contradict each other. Um, you know, 19% electric vehicles by the end of the decade is a very reasonable number. And when you ask consumers if they think that 50% of the cars will be electric by the end of the decade, asking them in 2022, when there's still 8 more years to go, as opposed to in 2025 when there's only 5 more years to go, I would definitely expect to see a drop, in that assessment. And again, I think the bar is quite high. To ask that 50% of the cars on the road be electric, like I said, it it's not even. I don't even think it's an ideal circumstance, given the fact that there are multiple use cases that I just laid out before. Right. The question is, should there be 50% electric vehicles in cities by the end of the decade? You're probably going to get a number that's much higher because, again, that's where the value add is much stronger, right? And by the way, cities have massive incentives to electrify the vehicles in the city. because it has a massive impact on emissions in the city, right? If you live in a dense urban area, removing, emission, cars that are, spewing out emissions, some of them quite toxic, from your dense urban centers is a massive public health win, right? So regardless of where the electricity comes from, if you can get, exhaust emissions away from where people live, that's a fantastic place to be, especially in a dense place where there's a lot of people and a lot of cars. So I don't think there's any contradiction there. I think that what we're still seeing is a steady and sustained move towards electric cars. But again, setting the bar for replacing all cars or replacing most cars with electric vehicles, I just don't think it's a realistic or even a desirable goal, given what a lot of people need cars for.
Fair enough, my friend. And I'm curious, right, to also ask you about your definition of how we can redefine entrepreneurial success. And how do you think entrepreneurial success is correlated to having, ambition as an entrepreneur? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's no secret that we venerate entrepreneurs that make it big. We like to look at billionaires and multimillionaires and kind of like there's almost this equation of how good you are of an entrepreneur is equal to how much money you made and how fast you made it, If you can show off that, like, wow, you're a great entrepreneur. But the reality is that when you boil down into what you might actually want at the end of the day in your life, the concept of entrepreneurship should be something that sets you free, right? So if you're out there trying to chase after the leaderboards and you're feeling just as trapped, running around and trying to hit those marks, then you didn't actually, in my opinion, achieve the goal of being an entrepreneur, which is to do something you're passionate about and be free to pursue it. So today, I'm by no means anywhere near, the class of people that make it on the Forbes magazines. But what I can brag about is that I work on a product that I love every day. I have a team that I'm just delighted to have with me every step of the way. We have a small company with a small team that, really feels much more like a family, and just a group of friends that are partnered up on something interesting. That to me is the definition of success. I really don't see how, multiplying how much money I have in the bank at this stage makes me that much happier than the happiness of being able to feel that every single day I'm doing something I'm doing something I love with people I love. That to me is redefining entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all right, I'm also curious to get a further discussion going when it comes to the environmental wins or benefits of going electric, my friend, because NPR released a study last year that said 58% of Americans believe that electric vehicles will be better for the environment than gas-powered cars by the end of the decade, which, by the way, is a decline from 63% in 2022. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on separating fact from fiction when it comes to elevating sort of the environmental benefits of going electric, my friend. What are your thoughts, Bonnie?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. Look, as to why sentiment around how good electric vehicles are is shifting, I think that it's a correction to what it's always meant to be. Electric vehicles are not like a magic solution to, the climate question, right? They are a massive improvement, and I'll get into that in a second. But it's not a silver bullet. It's not like if we changed, every single car tomorrow to be an electric car, they wouldn't have polluting downstream effects. They do. The manufacturing and for certain parts of the cars, the batteries, for example, is polluting. They do still burn CO2 depending on the electrification of the grid and how that's conducted. All that remains fully accurately true. It's not like if you change your gas powered car to an EV, suddenly you're carbon neutral. That's not true. But what is very, very important to keep in mind is that it's a massive reduction in the long-term carbon impact of that car. So a couple of things that are worth noting. One, electric vehicles just last much longer. If the typical car kind of ends its lifetime at around 150,000 miles, an EV is easily 200 to 250K. That's a huge difference. And I don't have to manufacture nearly as many cars to get what I need done, get as many miles as I need driven. The second thing is the car just is much more energy efficient. And that's ultimately what matters the most. One is that it's the energy conversion loss is much less, right? So let's just imagine that you're dealing with a big oil power plant, and that's the only thing that's supplying energy to the car, right? People will say, well, the electric grid is not fully green, so therefore, we're still burning oil in order to, or natural gas in order to power these cars. Therefore, what's the difference than just a gas car? The reality is that, these power plants are massively much more efficient at converting hydrocarbons into power than the process of refining crude oil into gasoline, shipping it across to where it needs to be, and then burning it with a tiny little engine that is nowhere near as efficient as a massive power plant will be in generating the same amount of end case energy. Right. So just in that alone, the efficiency savings are are way more on the electric car side. And as power grids, become green opinion, yeah, I think it's just a correction. And I think initially when people were just getting familiarized with EVs, they were thinking it's a magic bullet that no more emissions, period. But that is corrected to realize, yes, there are emissions associated with electric vehicles, just as with anything. But the facts on the ground are that an EV over its lifetime will produce between a third to one half of the emissions as a gas car. That is a massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, I'm curious to ask you about, because I'm going to ask you about one more study, and it comes from the University of Chicago. And they say that they believe that 37% of Americans are strongly considering making an electronic vehicle purchase for the next car purchase, my friend. So I'm curious to ask you what you make of those findings, but also the questions that consumers should ask themselves before renting or buying an electric vehicle. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a vehicle is an extremely personal choice, right? For some people, it's just a utility to get around. For other people, it's a form of their identity, right? People, especially in cities like LA, like your car says a lot about you for some people. So the question of, why should people choose electric cars remains a deeply personal one first. The primary reason is because they like it, number one, right? But then you've got, what are the specs? How far can it go? What's the price? What are the features that are included? People will make these decisions for any number of different reasons. When it comes to, are we seeing more people choosing electric over gas? The answer is unequivocally yes. People are realizing that, they're getting better performance at a lower cost with better longevity, less maintenance, and in many cases, again, depending on your arrangement in your city, more convenience. And so the question for, are people considering more uses of electric vehicle? 100%. And by the way, we're seeing this across the board. On our side, we deal with a lot of enterprise clients and corporate business. They all, to some degree, are going electric, and whether it's fast or slow, because the savings are there and because it meets a lot of their sustainability targets that they're looking to push forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I ask you my last question, I'm gonna ask you to break it down for us. So I know that if you want to rent a car on your website, you just go to the website and you rent the car that you want, and then the owner is sort of the car is notified, right? That someone's
Mm-hmm.
going to rent their car. But I'm curious from the owner's standpoint, when they go onto the website, is there's a breakdown on how they'll receive the revenue. So I'm wondering if you can just go back and explain the business model of how Eon works and why it's so innovative, my friend.
Of course. So if you're a car owner and you're trying to monetize this car, make a little extra money, basically what you do is you sign on to our website, create an account, you link your car to our site, so you list it. We do a couple of checks with the car directly, so we connect to the vehicle, and then we're reading data off the car to see its current condition, make, model, year, etc. Once it's ready to go, you as the owner get to set your price. So you decide, how much you want to rent it for. Obviously, the higher the price, the more money you make, but the less rentals you make. So you kind of figure out where you want to be. And then from there, as soon as the car is booked, you're notified. Uh, all that's expected is that you just keep the car clean and charged before a rental, and that's it. And we handle the rest. And obviously, you see a breakdown of how much money you make. We do a revenue share model. So we take a percentage of every trip that we bring to the car and book through. Um, and that's it. It's a very simple process, and we try to keep it as easy as possible. We do a lot of work on our end so that you don't have to do work on your end.
Well, as easy as you can make business, the more business you make, right?
Exactly. You nailed it.
Absolutely. And Ray, finally, tell me, when you look at your own life and legacy through this company and through your life mission of wanting to improve automation and making this process more simpler, accessible, and inclusive, my friend, how do you want your legacy to be defined from both a personal and professional standpoint?
Look, at the end of the day, the most satisfying part of all this is people. It's not like I get excited about solving the problem. I think as much as any engineer is, but the thing that really becomes like the feel good, satisfying part of it is knowing that there's a college kid on our platform that is making enough money off of his car that he can afford to pay for his college tuition, right? It's knowing that we've got employees that are able to support their entire family through what we're doing. It's knowing that we've reduced costs in neighborhoods where people needed to get around, but there weren't enough options and they weren't priced appropriately for them to have good options to get around town. And it's knowing that overall, in aggregate, we're having a giant impact on carbon emissions and reducing unnecessary waste. One of the things that's really incredible is that one shared car. There's a study out of France. I forget exactly what it was, but they said something to the degree of one shared vehicle in a neighborhood provide with sufficient access is basically like taking 5 cars off the road, because people are able to use the same car for less. That means less congestion. That means more parking spaces, which everyone desperately needs. That means, frankly, just lower cost of getting around. And you put all that together, and it's kind of a no-brainer that this is what we should all be aiming for anyway, and not even for altruistic reasons. It's just better to live this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Ray, tell me, if people want to get connected with Eon or yourself personally, what's the best way they can do that?
Of course, easiest way is to go straight to our site, eonrides.com. If you're looking to connect with me directly, I'm on LinkedIn as Rei Vardi. You can look up Eon Rei Vardi and you'll find me.
Fabulous, my friend. Well, I think you're really on to both an innovative and creative way to rethink the way that we look at the automotive industry, my friend. So I want to thank you for the efforts that you've put into automotive innovation and for joining me this afternoon to engage in conversation. It's most appreciated.
It was my pleasure, Kevin. Thank you so much. I had a great time chatting with you. Thanks a lot.